My name is Clayton Aaron, and I live outside. For the last 6 months, I've lived here. It's a shack that I found in the middle of the woods, clearly abandoned because a tree fell on it. It probably sounds like BS if I say that I became homeless on purpose, but factually, I made a brief YouTube video declaring that I was doing so, you know. I stand by that it is more intentional than what other homeless people experience. Besides that, I tried to make these last 7 months, since about September of 2025, I tried to make them as genuinely hobo-like as possible. I did not start here. I started first off at a homeless shelter called Pathway, but very quickly realized that the culture of the people at Pathway was discouraging enough, and the setup of the mechanism of the shelter, including the way that it gets funding, is designed in a way that seems to kind of keep you stuck there. And most of the people that I met there had been there before, maybe several times. That being said, I feel a deep camaraderie with everybody who is there with me. When we see each other, it's all smiles. But I realized after about 3 weeks that it didn't make sense for me to stay there. That if I wanted to escape the life patterns that made me homeless, I had to get away from... If I wanted to escape the life habits that keep a person homeless, I needed to get away from a place that enforces those habits and forces you to live with other people who have other habits that prevent you from either being employable or being self-motivated enough to do something that doesn't require a job. Because factually, if I was out here starting a little farm, I would count that as work. And if I sold those things, I would count that as a job. I'm not poo-pooing homesteading, basically. But I am saying that living at a homeless shelter is so much of a waste of time that it will either keep you stuck at the shelter much longer than you need to be, or they will end up kicking you out onto the street, having prevented you from learning how to survive without the shelter, and then you will just hang out outside until you get to come back and stay again either the next week or the next month. I was extremely surprised to find through this experience that a lot of my conservative Christian and Mormon friends who preached an idea that homeless people get there themselves, either on purpose or through stubbornness, I resisted believing them for a very long time, even though I became religious at 18 and I'm 31 now. How could a person choose misery so directly? That was part of my question. And I remembered basically that an ancestor of mine, Robert the Devil, or Robert the First, King of Normandy, supposedly cast himself into homelessness as a manner of repentance for evil he had done, and that it was a great learning experience for him. So I decided, when things were starting to get a little rocky on my end, to just let it happen and give it a shot. Because factually, I had recently beaten the Elden Ring DLC, which means I can do hard shit. Absolutely, I can do hard things. Like fighting Baal. My goodness. But, after having done it 1 month in the shelter and 6 months outside the shelter now. I think honestly, maybe the conservatives are right, because this isn't miserable. It wasn't miserable at the shelter. The people at the shelter are not miserable, and it's not miserable out here, even though I live out in a squatter hut, you know? It's really going to surprise a lot of people to hear that homelessness feels like vacation, but it does. Homelessness is the same as vacation, because you can choose where to stand, sit, walk, eat, exercise. You can choose everything for the entire day, with the exception of the curfew of the homeless shelter, or the coldness of night in the winter. You can't really argue with that. You have to go home and get in a sleeping bag. But besides that, I was very surprised to find how many homeless people seem not only to not mind their situation, but to frankly enjoy it, including the pride that you get to feel for not being a rich asshole. And then the joy that you get to feel with your homeless friends for yelling at rich people in their cars and making fun of them, even though, it's like, look at yourself, right? But we did. That was the culture, was to hate rich people and to hate Republicans and to hate everybody who was succeeding, because we looked at ourselves and considered ourselves to not be successful. Even though I'm telling you, there is a real and genuine desire to be there that many people have. And if they don't have it, then they won't stay there very long. I left because I didn't want to keep feeling the results of my actions there. Treating wealthy people like shit, participating in nicotine, cannabis, occasionally taking a night away from the shelter and getting hammered. Basically, while you're there, any friend that you make is eventually going to hand you a drug and say, "Here, this one's on me, buddy." And he really thinks he's doing a nice thing for you. He really does think that that's like a bro thing to do, even though it is exactly what is keeping you homeless, and a few other things too. Something to consider is that a homeless person who lives outside all the time is a Native American, not a homeless person. They have a tradition, a lifestyle, a culture, ideally. But a homeless person in the city, that's a homeless person. They become addicted to anything that's enjoyable. They wander listlessly. I also did. We wasted a ton of time. Like I said, vacation. And if you don't think that that can be a vacation, recall that all of our human ancestors from every race came from people who lived outside and pretty much did what homeless people do, with the exception that that the women in tribes maintained the houses and some cleanliness and made some food, and the men occasionally went hunting. But those are very natural and enjoyable human activities. So like I'm saying, if you don't think homelessness feels like a vacation, that's because you haven't done it yet. I'm speaking from experience, and my experience was the same experience as the other 100 people in that shelter, with the exception of like 2 autistic guys who came in like right before I left. Their experience had to be different because they were incapable of making friendships. So they actually both went to college right away and got the fuck out of there. Good job to them, But generally, the shelter does not help people to do that psychologically. It pressures you to do things like that, but it also provides an environment with a curfew that together basically attach you in a dependent way to the worst possible jobs that you can ever imagine. Jobs that pay the least, suck the most, and will not last more than a few weeks, which makes you dependent. Speaking frankly, we were like domesticated cattle who were being kept around for when certain industries in Peoria needed extra workers. And because the system and the shelter tell you that you're supposed to be a miserable homeless person who's grateful for every dollar you can get, you are, quote, thankful to get any job. So as soon as the worst job opens up and comes to you, you take it, even if it means that, even if it is definitely not going to lead to your freedom in the long term, and definitely not to your self-sufficiency ever. So moving on from that, the issues with the culture of homelessness and the fact that conservatives are pretty correct about how subsidizing shelters encourages homelessness. It very much does. Moving on from that, let's talk about how to actually make this work. If you want to try it, or if you find yourself accidentally in this position, which many people do for the first month. So, first off, I have never begged. I didn't beg from my friends. I don't beg in the street. I don't beg from business owners. Instead, I donate plasma. And there is basically a 100% chance that the city closest to you has a plasma center. So if you donate twice a week and you weigh 230 pounds or more like I do, then you get enough money by far to feed yourself for the entire month if you donate twice a week every week. Now, just real quick, I'm going to show you what my body looks like so that you know how good my nutrition still is. And that even though I am selling plasma twice a week, which is pure protein from your blood, I have maintained a high level of musculature by dedicating myself to exercise and healthy diet. But frankly, I am not dieting that hard. Mostly, I have to remember just not to spend money too fast on food, and to buy things that specialize in healthy protein and calories, such as whole milk for $2.20 at Target, cottage cheese for a similar price, eggs if you got something hot to cook on, but even chicken strips, hummus sometimes. And wouldn't you know it, if I stick to the dollar menu, a couple times a month I can even eat out on my own budget. And since I recently got Link, which is SNAP benefits or food stamps, I've been able to spend significantly more money on supplements for my amateur bodybuilding hobby. That being protein, that being BCAAs, pre-workout, creatine. I'm telling you, you can afford all of the things that you could afford before at a slightly slower pace and with a little bit more planning. Especially if you're willing to sign up for government benefits, despite the fact that you're basically keeping yourself in your own miserable state of vacation. To maintain hygiene, I go to Planet Fitness every day or close to every day. Brush my teeth, shave, shower, etc. And then also I work out. But again, the point is that you actually get to keep the vast majority of amenities, but you are forced, if you leave the shelter, you're forced to reprioritize your own spending and actions around things that actually relate to survival. I know I just said I buy supplements, but if you recall that I don't have a vehicle and that I live outside of town, you might consider that walking approximately 7 miles a day could be aided by having some healthy extra nutrition from the supplements. And that is my justification. Even before I was getting Link, I still bought protein once per month. I know this is controversial. I am sure that many people will be very upset that I said this as though it was a fact, based on what they're going to say is anecdotal evidence. Sure, it is an anecdote, meaning a personal story. It is a personal story, yeah. And it's the personal story of the other 99 people at Pathway Ministries in Peoria who are choosing to be homeless in part because Pathway wants to convince them to be homeless. Maybe that sounds like BS, but I'm telling you, look at how the shelter actually gets money. It's based on how many people are in the beds and how many donors will be impressed by what they see on the inside and then donate, usually, obviously, for like tax bonus reasons, right? Meaning that the shelter is extremely motivated to keep as many people there as possible and to get those people busy cleaning enough that the donors want to donate. So even though you're living at a homeless shelter, suddenly you have a list of chores and responsibilities that have nothing to do with you getting a job, and they do not pay you for that work that you do. Normally, I agree with conservatives that you should work for what you're getting and stuff. That is a big part of this whole thing. I'm saying that the way that it's done in a shelter specifically causes dependency and does not grow your ability to be hired. It merely grows your dependency on the shelter. So please, take it from a guy who's living it every day. Homeless people are not miserable. They are in a place that they enjoy being. And if you see a guy on the side of the road who's covered in dirt holding up a sign, please realize that he just rubbed dirt all over his face. He did that to look the part. I've spoken to many people who beg in Peoria, and every single time they'll say that the amount they make in a day is somewhere above 100. Some say 100, some say 130, someone said 150. I knew a female crack user with a bicycle who would make multiple hundred a day riding around on her bike, begging in parking lots. But you can probably guess that she didn't use that for the nutrition that I use my money for. And I was wrong before when I used to think that money given to hobos does not immediately turn into drugs. It does. I know because I was right there with a bunch of people who panhandle on occasion. Though not all of us do. Most of us consider it to be petty. And I watched as everybody got their SNAP at the beginning of the month, blew $50 of it on chips and soda in the first 3 days, and then sold the other $200 of it to get $100 of cash in order to buy one of various drugs or substances that they use to make their vacation just as good as they want it to be. So even though the shelter has a no-drug policy, lots of people there are on meth, are on opioids and other things while they are there. It's just they're better at playing off that they're not on drugs. Again, I know because I was offered these drugs. I watched people take these drugs in front of me. My buddy took a huge dose of Suboxone right before chapel and fell out of his chair. Tell me, what sense does it make that the shelter doesn't allow drugs, big air quote on that, and will not ever drug test you, ever? Like I said, it is a cycle that perpetuates your homelessness. It is not a shelter to raise you up into independence or freedom at all. And if you even admit to living there, the plasma center will ban you because they know. I really never expected that I would be the kind of person to make a video like this or say these kinds of things. But I honestly think at this point, at 31, after being homeless on purpose for 7 months, in a shelter for a month, out the shelter for 6 months, living through a very harsh Illinois winter with just a sleeping bag and a tent and this little shack you're looking at. But if you see a homeless person on the side of the street holding up a sign asking for money, the best thing that you can possibly do is look him dead in the face and tell him to go get a fucking job.